In the summer of 1988, the town of Havenwood, Vermont, was a place time had forgotten. It was the kind of town where you knew your neighbors by their first names, where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and where a sense of safety was as constant as the rolling hills. There were no deadbolt locks, no elaborate alarm systems, just a shared, unspoken trust that the worst things in the world happen somewhere else. That summer, the town's rhythm was defined by the carefree days of August. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass, the distant sound of a lawnmower, and the laughter of children playing. Among them were two inseparable friends, 9-year-old Lily Harper and 10-year-old Ethan Clark. They were the quintessential childhood duo, a whirlwind of skinned knees, shared secrets, and boundless energy. Lily, with her bright red hair and a smile that could melt snow, was the ringleader. Ethan, a quiet, thoughtful boy who was always a step behind Lily, was her loyal co-conspirator. On August 14th, they went to the woods, just a short walk behind Ethan's house, a place they had explored 100 times before. They were building a fort, a grand structure of sticks and branches meant to withstand any imagined enemy. Their last known contact was a shout to Ethan's mother, telling her they'd be home for dinner. But dinner came and they didn't. And then the streetlights came on and the laughter stopped. The frantic search began that evening. Neighbors, friends, and family fanned out across the town, calling their names into the darkening woods. The once familiar streets suddenly felt alien, the silence of the forest now deafening. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the discovery of Lily's faded red backpack, tangled in a thicket of blackberry bushes. Inside, a half-eaten granola bar and a single well-worn doll. The doll's eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to stare into the deepening twilight. 2 days later, the worst fears of a community were realized. The bodies of Lily Harper and Ethan Clark were found, side by side, in an old, abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. They had been brutally murdered. Their small, lifeless bodies lay in a space that was once a sanctuary of childhood games. The innocence of Havenwood, Vermont, was dead too. The small police department, used to handling lost pets and minor traffic violations, was completely overwhelmed. State police and FBI agents swarmed the town. Havenwood was no longer a place of safety and trust. It was now a crime scene, a labyrinth of yellow tape and hushed conversations. The investigation moved at a blistering pace. The evidence was scarce, but the brutality of the crime pointed to a killer with a cold, ruthless precision. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. The town's trust was gone. Now every neighbor was a suspect. Every passing car was viewed with suspicion. One of the first people questioned was Ethan's father, David Clark. A quiet, reserved man who had lived in Havenwood his entire life. His alibi was solid and his grief was palpable. He spent his days sitting on his front porch, staring into the woods where his son had last been seen. His wife, Sarah, was a different story. She was a tornado of pain and rage, lashing out at the police and reporters who intruded on her grief. She insisted that the killer was a stranger, an outsider who had brought evil into their perfect town. The case went cold quickly. As the weeks turned into months, the investigators packed up and left, leaving the small police force to pick up the pieces of a town shattered by fear and loss. The fort in the woods was taken down. Lily's backpack and Ethan's favorite baseball glove were returned to their families, silent relics of a bygone time. For decades, the case remained an unsolved mystery. It became a dark legend, a story whispered around bonfires to terrify a new generation of kids. The community of Havenwood never recovered. The innocence was gone, replaced by a permanent shadow of mistrust. Doors were locked. Kids were told not to go into the woods. But for one person, the case was never closed. Detective Mark Jensen, a rookie on the force in 1988, had been the first on the scene. He had seen the small, silent bodies of Lily and Ethan, and that image had haunted him for 30 years. He kept a box in his office, filled with old case files, newspaper clippings, and a single faded photograph of the two children laughing, their arms around each other. Now, retired and battling his own demons, Jensen decided to take one last look at the case. He wasn't looking for new evidence. He was looking for what they had missed all those years ago. He returned to Havenwood, a town he had fled decades before. The old hunting cabin was a dilapidated ruin, reclaimed by the forest. But the quiet of the place, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, brought back a flood of memories. Jensen started with the interviews. The old, handwritten notes from the original investigation. He reread the statements from every person of interest, every neighbor, every family member. The statements from David and Sarah Clark were especially haunting. He was struck by the difference in their reactions. David's grief was a quiet despair. Sarah's was a loud, public fury. He remembered the original investigator's assumption. A grieving mother is a normal reaction, a quiet father is suspicious. He wondered if that assumption had clouded their judgment. Then he found it. A single, small detail that had been overlooked. A passing mention in a neighbor's statement. The neighbor, a Mrs. Henderson, had mentioned seeing Ethan Clark's mother, Sarah, in the woods on the afternoon of the murder. She had been looking for the children, but her statement was dismissed as a mother's frantic search. But Mrs. Henderson had added a detail that the original investigators had ignored. Sarah was not frantic. She was calm. She was holding a small silver object in her hand. Mrs. Henderson couldn't identify it. Jensen tracked down Mrs. Henderson, now an elderly woman living in a nursing home. Her memory was fragile, but the one thing she remembered vividly was Sarah's unusual calmness. It didn't feel right, she said. The air around her was too still. She wasn't a mother looking for her child. She was waiting. He then re-examined the original crime scene photos. The photos of the hunting cabin taken with a grainy, dated camera. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small, almost invisible detail. A single, faint impression in the dirt floor of the cabin. It was a unique, jagged shape. It looked like the imprint of a key. Jensen's gut tightened. He remembered the silver object Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. He went to the last known residence of the Clark family. It was now owned by a young couple, but the old shed in the backyard was still there. It had been left untouched for years. He found a rusty old tackle box and inside a key. It was a key to the old hunting cabin. He checked the key. The jagged shape on the key was a perfect match for the impression in the crime scene photos. The silver object Mrs. Henderson saw was the key. The truth began to unravel. Jensen went to visit Sarah Clark, who was now living in a small apartment in Florida. She was a different woman. The rage was gone, replaced by a quiet, haunting sadness. Jensen laid the evidence in front of her. The reopened case files. The photo of the key. The statement from Mrs. Henderson. He didn't say a word. He just waited. Sarah broke. The dam of 30 years of silence shattered. She confessed. It wasn't the confession of a cold-blooded killer. It was the confession of a broken, grieving mother. The day of the murder, she had been arguing with her husband, David. He had been having an affair. She had found out just that morning. She was on the verge of leaving him, and she knew he would try to get custody of Ethan. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her son. The affair was with Lily Harper's mother, Mary, a detail the original investigation had missed. Sarah had seen them together, meeting in secret, in the quiet woods behind the houses. The day of the murder, Sarah had gone into the woods, not to look for the children but to confront Mary. But she found the children instead. They had seen her, and they had seen her with the key to the cabin. They had asked her what she was doing. They were just kids, but they knew something was wrong. In a moment of blind, rage-filled panic, Sarah had taken a knife from her purse, a small, ornamental pocket knife she had used for gardening. She told them they had to stay quiet, that it was a secret. They didn't understand. She saw the fear in their eyes. She knew they would tell someone. She didn't want to hurt them. She just wanted them to be quiet. She wanted to keep her life from falling apart. But the fear in their eyes was too much. She killed Lily first, then Ethan. The details were too brutal to recount. The sheer, cold-blooded act of violence from a woman who seemed so normal, so broken by grief, was incomprehensible. She had covered the bodies, cleaned the scene, and walked out of the woods calmly with the key in her hand, knowing she had to get rid of it. She dropped it in the well-worn path, hoping it would be lost in the leaves. She then had gone to her husband, crying, pretending to be worried about the children. She had convinced him to join the search, to keep up the facade of a concerned parent. Her public display of rage and fury wasn't a mask for grief. It was a calculated performance, a way to deflect suspicion and convince everyone that a stranger had committed the crime. The town of Havenwood was stunned by the news. The killer wasn't an outsider. She was a neighbor, a friend, a grieving mother who had been mourned for 30 years. The community's fear was replaced by a deep, hollow betrayal. The story wasn't about a stranger who came and went. It was about a darkness that had always been there, simmering beneath the surface of a perfect town. Sarah Clark was arrested and charged with the murders of Lily Harper and Ethan Clark. The case that had haunted a community for a generation was finally closed. But the resolution brought little peace. The town's innocence was gone forever. The children of fear were finally at rest, but the community they left behind would never truly be the same. This story isn't just about a murder. It's about what happens when a community's trust is shattered and the monsters we fear are the ones we invite into our homes. This is the story of how a small town's innocence was stolen by a secret, a moment of weakness, and a truth no one wanted to believe. If this story reminded you that the truth is often stranger than fiction, please subscribe for more. And if you have a story you want us to tell, let us know in the comments below. We're here to give a voice to the forgotten.